U.S. Marine jokingly asked for the old man's rank, until his reply made the entire GP tent silent. The canvas tent at Marine Corps Base Pendleton hummed with the energy of a Saturday open house. Families streamed through displays of equipment, vehicles, and tactical gear, while young Marines in crisp uniforms stood at their stations, answering questions and demonstrating their skills with barely concealed pride. Corporal Jake Morrison was having the time of his life. At 23, with 2 deployments under his belt and a chest full of ribbons, he felt on top of the world. His station showcased modern communications equipment, and he'd been explaining satellite uplinks and encrypted systems to impressed civilians all morning. "This is state-of-the-art technology," Jake told a group of high school students gathered around his display. "Nothing like what the old-timers used. We can coordinate operations across continents in real time. It's a whole different Marine Corps now." The students nodded, taking photos with their phones, clearly impressed by the confident young Marine and his high-tech equipment. That's when Jake noticed an elderly man standing at the edge of his display area. The man looked to be in his 80s, wearing a simple white polo shirt with a small, tarnished pin on the collar. His khaki pants were pressed but worn, and he walked with a slight limp, leaning on a wooden cane. He stood quietly, watching the demonstration with patient, knowing eyes. Jake's first thought was that the old man looked lost, probably wandered away from the family he'd come with, confused by all the activity. Maybe looking for a bathroom or the exit. Definitely not someone who belonged in a military tent, looking at tactical equipment. "Sir," Jake called out, his tone carrying just enough condescension to make his fellow Marines nearby smirk. "The bingo hall is down the street. This is a military open house. Are you looking for your grandkids or something?" A few of the high school students laughed uncomfortably. Jake's buddies, Lance Corporals Chun and Rodriguez, exchanged grins. The old man was clearly out of place in his civilian clothes, while they stood in their immaculate uniforms. But the elderly man didn't look embarrassed or confused. He simply smiled slightly and remained where he was, his eyes moving from the communications equipment to Jake's face, with an expression that was hard to read. "I'm serious, sir," Jake continued, his voice louder now, playing to his audience. "You look a little confused. This is advanced military technology. Probably pretty overwhelming for someone your age. Why don't you head back to the family area?" The old man took a slow step forward, his cane clicking softly on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "I'm not confused, son. I was just admiring your setup. Very impressive equipment." Jake rolled his eyes. "Yeah, well, I don't think you'd understand most of it. This is cutting-edge stuff. Not like whatever you might remember from. When were you around? Korea? Vietnam? Both, actually," the old man replied calmly. Jake snorted. "Right. Well, things have changed a lot since then, sir. We're talking about technology that didn't exist in your day. Satellite communications, real-time coordination, digital encryption. It's a completely different military." The old man nodded slowly. "I can see that. Though I have to say, some of the principles are the same. Communication is still about getting the right information to the right people at the right time, isn't it?" "Sure, Grandpa," Jake said with exaggerated patience. Several Marines at nearby stations had stopped what they were doing, sensing something entertaining developing. "But we do it faster, more securely, and more effectively than your generation ever could. No offense, but you guys were working with radios that probably weighed 50 pounds and had a range of a few miles." "The PRC-25, the old man said quietly. 23.5 pounds actually, with the battery. Range varied depending on terrain, but yes, a few miles was typical." Jake blinked, momentarily thrown off. Yeah, whatever. The point is, we've moved way beyond that. You probably couldn't even begin to operate this equipment." The old man's eyes moved to the communications console, studying it for a long moment. "Looks like a /PRC, 117G multiband radio system. Satellite capable, frequency hopping, GPS integrated. Good system. We started developing the early versions in the 80s, though of course the current model is much more advanced." Jake's confident smile faltered slightly. "How do you?" And that's a sinker setup for secure voice and data," the old man continued, nodding toward another piece of equipment. "Single-channel ground and airborne radio system. Been standard issue for a while now. The interface looks more user-friendly than the earlier versions." The tent had grown quieter. Other Marines were drifting over, curious about the exchange. Jake felt his face getting hot. "Okay, so you've read some manuals or something," Jake said defensively. "But there's a big difference between reading about equipment and actually using it in combat. No disrespect, but whatever you did back in Vietnam or wherever doesn't really compare to modern warfare." "You're absolutely right," the old man agreed. "Warfare has changed dramatically. Better technology, better training, better coordination. You and your generation have capabilities we could only dream about." Jake relaxed slightly, feeling like he'd won the point. "Exactly. So maybe you can understand why. Though I have to say," the old man interrupted gently, "the fundamentals are still the same. Leadership, courage under fire, taking care of your Marines. Those things don't change with technology, do they?" "Sure," Jake said impatiently. "But, tell me, Corporal," the old man said, his voice still quiet, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "When you deployed, did you lead Marines in combat?" "Yes, sir," Jake said, his pride returning. "2 tours. Afghanistan. Good for you. That takes real courage. How many Marines were under your command?" "I was a team leader. For Marines plus myself." The old man nodded. 5 Marines. That's a serious responsibility. Did you bring them all home?" "Yes, sir," Jake said firmly. "Every one of them." "Then you did your job well. You should be proud of that." Jake felt some of his antagonism fading. Maybe the old man wasn't as clueless as he'd thought. "Thank you, sir. Though I do have to correct you on one thing," the old man said, that slight smile returning. "You keep calling me sir. That's not quite accurate." Jake frowned. "I was just being respectful." "Oh, I appreciate that. But sir is what you call officers. What you should call me depends on what I was, doesn't it?" The tent had gone completely quiet now. More than a dozen Marines had gathered, forming a loose circle around Jake and the old man. Something in the atmosphere had shifted. Jake felt a cold prickle run down his spine. What were you, sir?" The old man reached up slowly and touched the small pin on his polo shirt. It was tarnished and worn, but now that Jake looked at it closely, he could make out the design. An anchor, eagle, and globe. "I was a Marine corporal. Like you." "Okay," Jake said, his voice less certain now. "Thank you for your service. But I still don't understand what." "You asked what rank I was," the old man said. "Actually, you jokingly suggested I must have wandered in from a bingo hall. You implied I was too old and confused to understand modern military technology. You suggested that whatever I did in my service wasn't relevant to today's Marine Corps." Jake's face was burning now. Around him, his fellow Marines had gone completely still. "I didn't mean any disrespect," Jake started, but the old man raised a hand. "Let me tell you what I did, Corporal, since you seem curious. I enlisted in 1966, when I was 18 years old. I went to Vietnam as a rifleman. I carried an M14 that weighed 9.5 pounds, humped through jungles in 100-degree heat, and learned real fast what combat was about." The old man's voice remained quiet, but there was steel in it now. "I did 3 tours in Vietnam. On my second tour, I was promoted to sergeant and led a squad, 13 Marines. On my third tour, I was a staff sergeant leading a platoon, 43 Marines under my command." Jake's mouth had gone dry. "After Vietnam, I stayed in, did a tour in peacekeeping operations, then another in Beirut in '83. I was a gunnery sergeant by then. I was there when the barracks was bombed. Lost a lot of good Marines that day." The old man's eyes had gone distant, remembering things that Jake couldn't imagine. "Then I did another tour. And another. Went to the first Gulf War as a master sergeant. Led a company into Kuwait. Brought most of them home, though not all. Never do bring them all home, no matter how hard you try." He paused, his weathered hand gripping his cane a little tighter. I stayed in until 2001. 35 years of service. I was going to retire, finally spend time with my wife and kids. But then September 11th happened, and I couldn't leave. Not then. So I did one more deployment. Afghanistan, 2002. I was 54 years old, leading young Marines not much older than my own grandchildren, trying to keep them alive in a country that didn't want us there. The tent was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Every Marine present stood at attention without anyone calling for it, instinctively responding to the presence of something they all recognized. I finally retired in 2003, the old man continued. After 37 years of service, I was a sergeant major when I left. I led Marines in 4 different conflicts across 4 decades. I buried friends, I wrote letters to parents, I made decisions that cost lives and decisions that saved them. I learned how to use every piece of communications equipment the Marine Corps had, from field phones to satellite systems, because that was my job, to make sure my Marines could talk to each other and coordinate effectively. He looked directly at Jake, his eyes, still sharp despite his age, boring into the young corporal. So when you asked what rank I was, Corporal Morrison, the answer is Sergeant Major. And when you suggested that what I did in Vietnam or wherever doesn't compare to modern warfare, you're right in one sense. Every war is different. Every generation faces different challenges. But you're wrong in another sense, because leadership, sacrifice, and taking care of your Marines, those things never change. They're the same now as they were in 1966, and they'll be the same 50 years from now. Jake felt like the ground had opened up beneath him. Around him, he could see the expressions on his fellow Marines' faces, shock, awe, embarrassment on his behalf. Sergeant Major, Jake managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. I apologize. I had no idea. No, you didn't, the Sergeant Major said, not unkindly. And that's the problem, isn't it? You saw an old man in civilian clothes, and you made assumptions. You thought age meant irrelevance. You thought your 2 deployments gave you the right to dismiss someone you knew nothing about. The old man took another step forward, close enough now that Jake could see the lines etched deep in his face, the scars partially hidden by his collar, the way his left hand trembled slightly, probably from old injuries. Let me give you some advice, Corporal. Free of charge. The Marine Corps you serve today was built by Marines like me. Every piece of equipment you use, every tactic you employ, every privilege you enjoy, it was paid for by generations of Marines who came before you. Some of them came home. Many didn't. All of them deserve your respect. Yes, Sergeant Major, Jake said quietly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. And here's another piece of advice. Never assume that someone has nothing to teach you just because they're old or dress differently or don't fit your picture of what a warrior looks like. Some of the toughest Marines I ever served with were quiet men who didn't need to brag or show off. They just did their job, took care of their people, and carried their experiences with dignity. The Sergeant Major's expression softened slightly. You're a good Marine, Corporal. I can tell. You brought your team home, and that matters. But you're young, and you've got a lot to learn about humility, about respecting those who came before you, about understanding that you're part of something much bigger and older than yourself. I understand, Sergeant Major, Jake said, and he meant it. He felt about 2 inches tall. Do you? The old man asked. Then let me ask you something. Do you know why I came to this open house today? No, Sergeant Major. Because I wanted to see young Marines like you. I wanted to see the technology you're using, the training you're receiving, the Corps you're building. I wanted to feel connected to the organization I gave most of my life to. I wanted to be proud of the next generation. He paused, letting that sink in. And I am proud, Corporal, even of you, despite this conversation, because you care about your job. You're proud of your service. You want to impress people with what you do. Those are good instincts. You just need to balance them with humility and respect. Jake nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The Sergeant Major turned to address the entire group of Marines who had gathered. Listen up, Marines. All of you. You serve in the finest military organization in the world. You have the best equipment, the best training, the best support. But never forget that you stand on the shoulders of giants. Every Marine who came before you contributed something to what you have today. And someday, you'll be the old veterans that young Marines look at and make assumptions about. How do you want to be treated then? With respect, Sergeant Major. Several Marines answered in unison. Exactly. So treat your veterans with respect now. Learn from them. Listen to them. Honor their service. Because without them, you wouldn't be here. He turned back to Jake one last time. Corporal Morrison, I'm going to leave now. But before I go, I want you to remember something. That pin on my shirt, it's not tarnished because I don't take care of it. It's tarnished because I wore it for 37 years. Through jungles and deserts and mountains. Through peace and war. Through the best and worst moments of my life. It's earned every scratch and mark on it. The sergeant major reached up and unpinned the small anchor, eagle, and globe from his shirt. He held it out to Jake. I want you to have this. Jake's eyes went wide. Sergeant Major, I can't. Yes, you can. Take it. Put it somewhere you'll see it every day. And when you see it, remember this conversation. Remember that you have a responsibility to honor those who came before you. Remember that someday, you'll be the old veteran, and some young Marine will make assumptions about you. And remember that the Corps is bigger than any one of us. With shaking hands, Jake accepted the pin. It was warm from the Sergeant Major's body heat, and heavier than he expected. Thank you, Sergeant Major, Jake whispered. I'll never forget this. I know you won't. The old man smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Now get back to work. You've got families to impress and a Corps to represent. The Sergeant Major turned and began walking toward the exit, his cane clicking with each step. But he only made it a few feet before Jake called out, Sergeant Major. The old man stopped and turned. Jake snapped to attention, rendering the sharpest salute of his life. Around him, every Marine in the tent did the same, more than 20 Marines standing at perfect attention, honoring one of their own. The Sergeant Major's eyes misted slightly. He straightened as much as his old back would allow, and returned the salute with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times. Semper Fi, Marines, he said quietly. Semper Fi, Sergeant Major. They responded in unison, their voices carrying through the tent and out into the open house beyond. As the Sergeant Major walked away, the tent remained silent for a long moment. Then Lance Corporal Chen let out a low whistle. Dude, he said to Jake, you just got absolutely schooled by a living legend. Jake looked down at the pin in his hand, feeling its weight. I know. 37 years of service, Rodriguez said, shaking his head in amazement. 4 wars. Can you even imagine? No, Jake admitted. I really can't. Word of the encounter spread through the base, like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew the story. The cocky young corporal who had mocked an elderly visitor, only to discover he was talking to a sergeant major with 37 years of service. Jake expected to be ridiculed, and some of that happened. But more often, Marines approached him with respect, wanting to know what the sergeant major had said, what advice he'd given, what it had felt like to be in his presence. It felt like being small, Jake told them honestly, like suddenly understanding how little I actually know. That evening, after the open house had ended and the crowds had left, Jake sat alone in the tent with the sergeant major's pen in his hand. He thought about the old man's words, about humility and respect and understanding that he was part of something bigger than himself. He thought about the assumptions he'd made based on appearance and age, about how close he'd come to missing out on meeting a true warrior because he'd been too arrogant to see past civilian clothes and a cane. And he thought about the future, about decades from now, when he might be the old veteran at an open house, hoping to feel connected to the Corps he'd served, hoping that young Marines would treat him with the dignity he deserved. Jake's platoon sergeant found him there, still holding the pen. I heard about what happened, Staff Sergeant Williams said, sitting down beside him. Rough day. Best day of my career, Jake replied quietly. And the most humbling. Williams nodded. That's Sergeant Major. His name is Richard Cole. I did some checking. He's a legend in the Corps. Multiple Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, a Navy Cross. He was at Key San in '68. led the platoon that held Hill 881 North for 3 days against overwhelming numbers, saved his entire company. Jake felt his stomach drop. I told him he probably wouldn't understand modern warfare. Yeah, I heard that part too, William said with a slight smile. But Jake, here's the thing. He didn't come here to embarrass you. He came because he still loves the Corps. And when you disrespected him, he could have destroyed you, could have made a scene, could have called for your command, could have made sure you got NJP'd for disrespecting a senior Marine, even a retired one. Why didn't he? Because he's a better Marine than that. He saw a teaching moment, and he took it. He gave you a gift, Jake, the gift of perspective, the gift of humility. And that pin, that's not just a piece of metal. That's a piece of history, given to you by someone who wants you to be better. Jake looked at the pin, seeing it differently now. I don't deserve this. Maybe not yet, Williams agreed. But you will. You'll earn it by remembering what you learned today, by treating veterans with respect, by being humble enough to learn from those who came before you. That's how you honor that gift. Jake carefully pinned the anchor, eagle, and globe to his own uniform, right over his heart. I'm going to find him, Jake said suddenly. Sergeant Major Cole. I'm going to find him and apologize properly, and I'm going to ask if I can learn from him. Williams smiled. That's a good start, Marine. That's a real good start. Over the next few weeks, Jake did exactly that. He found Sergeant Major Cole through the Base Veterans Association and asked if he could visit. The old man invited him to his modest home, where they sat on the back porch drinking coffee and talking about the Marine Corps. Cole didn't lecture. He didn't hold grudges. He simply shared stories about leadership in combat, about mistakes and lessons learned, about the Marines he'd served with and the ones he'd lost. You know what the hardest part of command is? Cole asked one afternoon. It's not the tactical decisions or the physical courage. It's the moral courage to admit when you're wrong, to ask for help when you need it, to respect people who might know more than you do. Is that why you gave me another chance? Jake asked. After how I acted? I gave you another chance because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age, Cole replied, confident to the point of arrogance, proud of my service, but lacking perspective. It took some hard lessons to humble me. I figured I could save you some pain by giving you one of those lessons before you learned it the harder way. What would have been the harder way? Cole was quiet for a moment. Making that mistake with Marines under your command, dismissing someone's experience or expertise because of their age or appearance, and having it cost lives. That's the kind of mistake you don't recover from, Jake. That's the kind that haunts you forever. Jake nodded, understanding. Thank you, Sergeant Major, for caring enough to teach me. That's what we do, Cole said simply. We pass on what we know. Every generation learns from the one before, then teaches the one after. That's how the Corps stays strong. Their visits became regular. Cole became Jake's mentor, teaching him things that no manual or training course could convey. The old Sergeant Major shared insights about leadership, about maintaining morale, about making decisions under pressure when there are no good options. And Jake listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't before. He took notes. He asked questions. He absorbed the wisdom of a man who had led Marines through 4 wars and 37 years of service. 6 months after the open house incident, Jake was promoted to sergeant. At the promotion ceremony, he asked Sergeant Major Cole to pin on his new rank. As the old man's weathered fingers carefully attached the chevrons to Jake's uniform, he spoke quietly enough that only Jake could hear. You've come a long way, Marine. You've learned humility. You've learned respect. You've learned to value experience and wisdom. But remember, the learning never stops. Stay humble. Stay curious. And always take care of your Marines. Yes, Sergeant Major, Jake replied. I will. I promise. Cole stepped back and rendered a sharp salute. Jake returned it with equal precision. Semper Fi, Sergeant Morrison. Semper Fi, Sergeant Major. Years later, Jake would tell the story to his own Marines about the day he mocked an elderly visitor at an open house and learned the most important lesson of his career. He told it not to embarrass himself, but to teach what he'd been taught, that respect costs nothing, that wisdom can come from unexpected places, and that the warrior you dismiss might be the hero you needed to meet. He kept Sergeant Major Cole's pin mounted in a shadow box in his office, alongside a photo of the two of them taken on Cole's porch. And when young Marines asked about it, Jake would tell them the story, the full story, including his own arrogance and foolishness. "That pin reminds me every day," Jake would say, "that I am part of something bigger than myself, that I stand on the shoulders of giants, that every Marine who came before me paid for the privileges I enjoy, and that the greatest warriors aren't always the loudest or the flashiest. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who don't need to prove anything because they've already proven everything." When Sergeant Major Richard Cole passed away in 2029 at the age of 81, hundreds of Marines attended his funeral. The eulogy was delivered by a Major General who had served under Cole in Afghanistan. But the most moving moment came when Sergeant Major Jake Morrison, now himself a seasoned leader with 20 years of service, stepped forward to speak. "I almost missed knowing this man," Jake began, his voice thick with emotion. "I almost dismissed him as a confused old man who didn't belong at a military event. But Sergeant Major Cole gave me a gift that changed my life. He gave me humility. He gave me perspective. He gave me a connection to the history and tradition of the Corps that I didn't know I was missing." Jake touched the pin on his chest, the same pin Cole had given him that day in the tent. "He taught me that the measure of a Marine isn't in the ribbons on their chest or the rank on their collar. It's in how they treat others, how they honor those who came before, how they prepare those who come after." Sergeant Major Cole did all of that every day for 37 years of active service and another 25 years of mentoring young Marines like me. He looked out at the assembled Marines, young and old, active duty and retired. "The Sergeant Major told me once that the Corps stays strong because every generation learns from the one before and teaches the one after. That's his legacy. Not just what he did in combat, though that was extraordinary, but what he taught to those of us privileged enough to learn from him." Jake's voice broke slightly. "I will never forget the day I met him. I will never forget the grace he showed me when I didn't deserve it. I will never forget the lessons he taught me. And I will honor his memory by passing those lessons forward, the same way he passed them to me." After the funeral, as Marines gathered to share stories and memories, Jake found himself surrounded by others whose lives had been touched by Sergeant Major Cole. Some had served under him decades ago. Others, like Jake, had met him in retirement and been mentored by him. He had that effect on people, an older master sergeant said. Made you want to be better. Made you understand what it really meant to be a Marine. He never made you feel stupid for not knowing something, a young lieutenant added. He just taught you, patiently, like he had all the time in the world to help you understand. That's because he did it out of love, Jake said quietly. Love for the Corps. Love for Marines. Love for passing on what he knew so that we could be better than he was. As the sun set over the cemetery, Jake stood alone by Cole's grave. The headstone was simple. Sergeant Major Richard Cole, USMC, 1948 to 2029, Semper Fidelis. Thank you, Sergeant Major, Jake said quietly, for everything, for the lesson, for the mentorship, for showing me what it really means to be a Marine. I'll carry it forward, I promise. A breeze stirred, rustling the flag on the grave, and in that moment, Jake could almost hear the old man's voice. That's what we do, Marine. We pass on what we know. Now get back to work. Jake smiled through his tears, straightened his uniform, and walked back to join his fellow Marines. He had work to do. Young Marines to mentor, lessons to teach, a legacy to honor. Because that's what Marines do. They take care of each other, across generations and decades. They pass forward wisdom and experience. They honor those who came before by being better than they were. And they never, ever forget the warriors who taught them what it really means to serve. Semper Fidelis, always faithful, not just to the mission or the Corps, but to each other, to the legacy, to the unbroken chain of warriors stretching back over 2 centuries, each generation teaching the next, each Marine honoring those who came before. That was Sergeant Major Richard Cole's gift to Jake Morrison and to every Marine whose life he touched. And that gift would live on, passed forward from generation to generation, as long as Marines remembered to honor their past, serve their present, and prepare their future.